Prime Minister is speaking at the NATO summit along with the Foreign Affairs Minister and the Defense Minister. Let's listen in here to Justin Trudeau.
In an uncertain world, it's important that we gather together like this to strengthen our relationships.
On top of numerous meetings with NATO allies this week, I had the opportunity to meet with many politicians and business leaders here in D.C., including members of Congress, senators, and governors. In a moment of deep global uncertainty, Canada and the U.S. know that they can count on each other, and that's really important. Our partnership is forged by shared geography and values, common interests, connections between our people, and of course, incredibly strong economic ties. Canada and the U.S. share one of the largest trading relationships in the world, which supports millions of good jobs on both sides of the border. We will keep working to strengthen and deepen this relationship. As an example, our two countries reached a key milestone this week with the negotiations on the Columbia River Treaty. We've reached an agreement on the terms of a new, modernized treaty with the support of Indigenous nations and British Columbia. This will protect communities from flooding, advance clean energy goals, and promote Indigenous priorities. As you've all seen, it's been a productive NATO summit this week. We discussed ways to bolster collective defense and deterrence capabilities, the importance of countering misinformation and disinformation, ongoing and evolving threats to global peace, prosperity, and the rules-based order. And we, of course, discussed ways to further support Ukraine. This afternoon, President Zelensky will join us at a meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council. As I discussed with him when we sat down yesterday, Canada will be providing further support so that Ukraine can continue to defend its freedom and ours. This includes an additional $500 million in military support as part of NATO's long-term pledge for Ukraine, supporting the launch of NATO security assistance and training for Ukraine, and up to $389 million to enhance F-16 pilot training, something Canada will be leading on in the coming year. The message is clear. We're here to support Ukraine to victory and beyond. Cette année, l'OTAN a 75 ans.
And this year, NATO is celebrating 75 years. Canada contributed to the foundation of this alliance that now includes 32 countries. And it supports it unconditionally. Facing an increasingly unstable and dangerous world, Canada is determined to do even more to defend Canadians, our values, and defend our allies.
Before our government took office, Canada was spending less than 1% of our GDP on defense. But we vowed to rapidly change that, and we followed through on our word. Canada is now in the top 5 NATO allies when it comes to absolute spending on defense, increased since 2015. In 2017, we released a $49 billion plan to ensure long-term predictable funding with, for example, investments in new warships, aircraft, and armored vehicles. In 2022, we went even further by announcing an investment of $38 billion in Canada's NORAD modernization plan, and we just recently released Our North Strong and Free, a defense policy update which invests $73 billion in defense over the next 2 decades. All that means that in Canada, since 2015, we've added $175 billion in defense spending. Our North Strong and Free also identifies areas of future investments in capabilities to respond to today's threats and challenges. As part of this work, Canada is taking the first step towards the procurement of up to 12 conventionally powered submarines. A larger, modernized submarine fleet will help us detect and deter threats on all 3 coasts and protect Canadians and Canadian interests. As we continue such investments, Canada fully expects to reach NATO's 2% of GDP spending target by 2032. We have built in a regular cycle of review in Canada's defense, including a new defense policy update in 2028. Through that process, We will continue to explore opportunities that will further increase defense spending and advance Canada's strategic interests. Le Canada s'attend à atteindre l'objectif
Canada
de dépenses
expects
de
to
2%
achieve the
du
2%
PIB fixé par le
GDP
temps
spending
d'ici 2032.
threshold
On s'est
by the
engagé à
GDP
examiner
by
la défense du
2032.
Canada régulièrement,
We will
notamment avec une
regularly
nouvelle
review
mise à
Canada's
jour
defense
prévue
spending
en
with a new
2028.
defense
On va
policy
continuer à
update,
étudier les possibilités
and we will continue to
d'augmenter
examine
encore
the
les
possibilities
dépenses
of
consacrées à la
further
défense,
increasing
de favoriser
our defense
les
spending
intérêts stratégiques
and to
du Canada.
foster Canada's strategic
This week,
interests.
we also landed a new historical agreement between Canada, the United States, and Finland to form an enhanced partnership called the ICE Pact. This new arrangement builds on the world-class expertise of our three countries to further strengthen our abilities to produce polar-capable vessels to meet the emerging needs for icebreakers in the decades ahead. This is a strategic imperative for us and for our allies. L'OTAN est plus uni que jamais.
NATO is more united
Canada
than
est une
ever.
voix forte au sein de
Canada
l'Alliance
is a strong voice within the alliance, a voice for peace, defense of our values, fighting misinformation and disinformation, to support Ukraine, and to deal with environmental threats with our new Center of Excellence for Climate Change and Security in Montreal.
Again, I want to thank the United States for hosting the summit here in Washington. I want to thank my friend, the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, for his steadfast and outstanding leadership and collaboration over the past 10 years. I look forward to working with my successor, another friend, Mark Rutte, to further strengthen the alliance. Merci d'être ici aujourd'hui.
Thank you for being here today. I would now be happy to take your questions.
Question and answer period. Nous allons maintenant commencer avec la période des questions. First question goes to Mercedes Stephenson, Global News.
Hi, Prime Minister. Thanks for taking our questions. You've announced that you're going to get to 2%, which has been a long anticipated thing that your allies have been looking for, and you say it's by 2032. But your government hasn't attached money in terms of commitments, weapon systems, explaining how we're going to get there. So I'm wondering how credible you think allies or Canadians will find this plan when you're releasing something so major as sort of a sub-point in a press conference.
On the contrary, we have steadily increased over the past years our investments in defense. $175 billion in new defense spending announced over the past 8 years, with significant material and equipment purchases. We have demonstrated, including most recently with our North Strong and Free Defense Policy Update, a credible, concrete plan that gets us to 1.74% by 2030. Now, that's starting from a place where the previous government had us below 1% of GDP on defense spending. So we have had to steadily and massively invest in increasing our capabilities in Canada over the past number of years, because it's not just something the Canadians expect or our allies expect. It's something that the world requires. The world is a more dangerous, unstable place with shifting geopolitical realities, more conflicts and wars springing up in places we wouldn't expect. There is a need, particularly with our responsibility over the Arctic, to be stepping up, and that's what we have done. And because we have a concrete plan that gets us to 174, with included in it plans on submarines that we hadn't yet officialized, with plans on other capabilities that we're developing, plans to increase enrollment and enlistment as well. These are things that means we can say with confidence and assurance that we will hit the 2% spending mark by 2032.
Next question.
Murray Brewster with CBC News. Prime Minister, thank you for taking the question. The timeline could have very well have been just a line in your defense policy last spring. Why wasn't it announced until this point? And you could have saved yourself a whole world of grief by doing so. So why wasn't it announced? But also at the same time, how much confidence can we place in this timeline when you see the economic indicators that underpin this calculation showing Canada actually moving backward away from the target you set in the defense policy? So how much can we actually place stock in what we see here today?
I think One of the things that we have demonstrated is consistent investments in defense, in understanding that the world has changed, and where the previous government had defense spending hit record lows below 1%, despite a commitment to move towards 2%, we had a lot of catching up to do, and that had big purchases involved. When Canada talks about reaching 10%, that's as one of the largest defense budgets in NATO. We are buying big things, we are building big things, and we are protecting the longest coastline in the world, including with increased responsibilities for the Arctic. We laid out a defense policy update that wasn't focused on answering media questions or focused on political advantage. It was about doing what is right and what is needed in a responsible way. That's why I'm happy to turn to Bill Blair to further talk about the DPU and the 2% pledge. Bill.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The defense policy that we released in April, I think, provided Canadians and our allies with a very clear roadmap and a path forward for Canadian investments in defense. But we also were very clear that in that document and the budget that was then subsequently released a few weeks later, we fully costed certain initiatives within that budget. But we acknowledged in our policy document that we needed to do many other things, and they are big things. And just for example, spending Canadian tax dollars well requires long-term planning and investment in capability in Canada. Our shipbuilding strategy, for example, to replace our Halifax fleet, is going to eventually deliver for the Royal Canadian Navy 15 new surface combatant ships, but the first one will not be delivered and available to them for deployment until 2032. It's a very, very significant investment in shipbuilding in Canada. It's going to create 10,800 sustainable jobs over 25 years. It's going to add $40 billion to our GDP, and it's going to deliver for the Royal Canadian Navy an extraordinary capability. We were able this week, and over the past several weeks, to assure our allies of the path forward for Canada and to show them that we had a credible, verifiable path to 2%, that we were making significant new investments in defense policy, and it's also enabled us to enter into, I think, an important and growing relationship with our NATO allies. I have signed an agreement earlier this week with Germany and with Norway in order to be more collaborative together in military national industrial policy and working together. There are a number of important conversations that our recent announcement with respect to the procurement of submarines have initiated among our allies. We think that there are real opportunities, and I am able to assure our allies we're serious about investing in Canada's national defense. We're doing it the right way so that there is a benefit not only to our military capability and our NATO allies, but also to the Canadian economy, Canadian workers, and Canadian industry. And that work has been moving forward with the introduction of our new defense policy. I think it gives us an opportunity to be able to demonstrate to our own country and hopefully to all of you that we are serious about investing in defense and we are doing the work that is necessary to do it right.
Question, question?
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Au mois d'avril, vous avez annoncé que le Canada allait dépenser l'équivalent d'1,76% du PIB
would spend 1.76 of the GDP by the end of 2030. Today, 3 months later, you are now stating 2% in 2032. So what do you have to say to people that are saying that it feels like improvisation and that you're yielding to panic? Answer? On the contrary, we are continuing to spend in defense, and we have been doing that for over 9 years now because the world has changed. The geopolitical situation in the world that we have known since the end of the Cold War no longer holds. We need to protect our Arctic, our allies, our democracies, and against new threats, including from Russia and others who are increasing their military capacities and their ambitions. This is not the situation that we would like to find ourselves in, but it's the situation in which we are. Starting in 2017, with our investments in the future to increase defense spending by 70%, we have committed to that already. The Harper Conservative government left defense spending at less than 1%, despite the commitment that he made to move towards 2%. But we have been doing that work. We've done the work to responsibly invest in order to increase in a gradual but unavoidable fashion. With our last announcement this summer, rather in the spring, just before the budget, achieving 1.76% of our GDP in 2030, we can see that this is a direct line towards this 2% in 2032. As part of our defense policy update announcement in the spring, we had also expected that we would be purchasing submarines, that we would have to invest in helicopters and other upcoming issues in the near future. But we hadn't yet accounted for those yet at the time because we had not made final decisions. But now we have made those decisions on the submarines, and we're seeing investments that are coming up and the needs across the world to defend democracies. We can say with assurance, not only will we achieve that 2% by 2032, but it is the right thing to do. It's the right thing for a responsible government and for a safe and secure Canada, in addition to a stable and prosperous future for Canada and its allies.
Prime Minister, you say you have a plan to spend this money, but do you also have a plan to pay for it? Because the estimates are this is going to cost $15, $20 billion annually in perpetuity. How do you do that in the fiscal framework? Do you cut other programs? Do you go deeper into deficit?
We have demonstrated over the past number of years that we can and have been investing in our national defense, $175 billion of projected new investments in national defense, and now and into the future, in a responsible way, and at a time where we're also stepping up with the most ambitious housing plan Canada has ever seen. Investing in childcare, because we know that's not just a social program, that's also an economic program. Creating economic growth, creating record high employment. Investing in the green jobs of the future. These are things we're doing even as we invest record levels in our military and continue to. The situation, the global context requires us to be stepping up on defense. But I will remind people that stepping up on defense investments doesn't just involve spending money outside of this country. It means investing in capacity building, in good jobs, in innovation, in factories and development of economic growth in Canada, while we invest in ourselves and our ability not just to defend ourselves and our north, but our allies at a time where everyone is interconnected.
Prochaine question.
Oui, bonjour, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Pour
Question?
votre annonce sur les brise-glaces, est-ce que ça voudrait dire des
Your
contrats
announcement
pour
on
la
the
Davy
icebreakers,
ici? Combien de brise-glaces
does that
ça
mean
construit là? Combien
contracts
d'emplois?
for specifications, and how many jobs would that mean? Answer, there are still many negotiations to be completed, but we can come to an agreement on the icebreakers because the DEV is investing in the setup, but also included in our naval field strategy in Canada. DEV did purchase
d'un chantier naval, effectivement, d'un chantier naval
a shipyard,
en Finlande, qui était anciennement
and that shipyard is in Finland.
Détenu par les Russes.
It was previously owned by the Russians, and it will now be part of the work that we will be doing in Canada and across the world to address the needs to fight Russian aggression. This is a partnership between Finland and Canada, as well as the US, and this partnership will be building more icebreakers. Yes, DV will certainly be part of that, but there are still negotiations ongoing and opportunities for other shipyards across the country to also participate.
Judy Trin with CTV News. Mr. Prime Minister, Joe Biden has been facing intense pressure at home from within his own party to step down because of concerns over his mental acuity at the age of 81 years old. During this NATO summit, Mr. Prime Minister, what is your assessment President Biden's performance and if he can lead on the global stage? And if you could also take that question and answer in French as well.
We are lucky on the world stage to have Joe Biden leading here at NATO, on the G7, in some extraordinarily consequential times. His depth of experience, his thoughtfulness, his steadfastness on the greatest issues and challenges of our time is a credit to the work that we're all doing together. And it has been, as always, a privilege and pleasure to work alongside him on big issues, and I look forward to continuing to. Le leadership de Joe Biden sur des enjeux d'importance mondiale dans ce moment
globally important issues, not only consequential for the planet, whether that's climate change, security, geopolitics, or economic growth. It has been extremely important. This is a leader with an enormous amount of experience who also has an extremely important depth and wisdom, and I'm eager to keep working with him.
Laura Dillon Kane, Bloomberg News. Thank you for taking our questions. You've been asked about 2% many times already, but I want to ask very frankly, how can Canadians be sure that you're serious about defense? Your government's been in power for nearly 9 years. Russia invaded Ukraine 2 years ago. We are neighbors with Russia in the Arctic. Your own defense minister wants a credible, verifiable plan. And yet this week, as of yesterday, your government was still discussing how to reach that goal. And today you come out with a timeline with no details of how to get there. So why should we believe you are serious and this is a priority for your government?
Canada is in the top 5 countries of NATO in terms of absolute increases in spending of NATO on military expenditures over the past 8 years. We have stepped up massively after years of underinvestment by the previous Conservative government. We have stepped up in investing and in planning for the future in a deeply changing world. We went from below 1% of GDP on defense spending under the Conservatives to now projecting 1.76% of GDP just in the coming years. And that extends clearly and naturally to 2% with the investments that we're announcing that are coming up, whether it's on 12 new submarines, up to 12 new submarines, whether it's on helicopters, whether it's on increased enrollment, whether it's on long-range missile, whether it's on any of the other things that we know Canada is going to need to continue to step up. Canada is the 7th largest defense expenditures in NATO. We are a big country with big responsibilities and big needs. That's why, whether we're talking about 15 new surface combatant frigates, whether we're talking about 88 fighter jets, whether we're talking about $38 billion for upgrading NORAD, whether we're talking about a total of $175 billion that we've announced over the past years for the coming years in defense spending, we have shown that a responsible government steps up in a changing world and does the necessary work, not just to increase defense spending, but to do it in the right way that gives both benefits and jobs to Canadians, but mostly that develops the capabilities that we, and quite frankly, our allies, are going to be relying on in an increasingly dangerous and uncertain world.
Next question.
Adrian Morrow with the Globe and Mail. Prime Minister, did you and your staff discuss the possibility of replacing Chrystia Freeland as Finance Minister with Mark Carney? And did you raise this issue with Mr. Carney personally? En français aussi.
I have been talking with Mark Carney for years now about getting him to join federal politics. I think he would be an outstanding addition at a time when Canadians need good people to step up in politics. In regards to Chrystia, she has been a close friend and ally and partner in doing really big things for Canada and will continue to be. Delivering the largest housing and most ambitious housing program in Canada's history, delivering on childcare, transforming our economy to be ready for the 21st century. These are all things that Chrystia has led on and will continue to. I have full confidence in her abilities and on the work we're going to be doing together. Bien sûr. Ça fait des années que je parle avec Mark Carney sur
I've been
son
speaking with
implication en
Mark Carney
politique.
for
Ça
years
prend de
and
bonnes
his involvement
personnes
in
pour
federal
s'impliquer en
politics.
politique.
The right people need to get involved in politics, and I'm always open to have new people join us.
C'est une amie, c'est une
Christia
collègue qui
is a good friend and colleague who has delivered over the years. She has delivered initiatives that have helped so many Canadians, whether that's the most ambitious housing program we've seen in Canada, $10 childcare services, or lasting economic growth, as well as steering us through a pandemic and creating more jobs. She continues to be a key member of my team, and I have full confidence in her.
This is for either the Prime Minister or Minister Blair. And correct me if my understanding is wrong here, but are there not some low-hanging fruit still that could be picked to reach that 2%? I mean, my understanding is that the U.S. Coast Guard is under the Defense Department. Its ships are armed. It's able to book all of those expenses with NATO. Canada's Coast Guard is under Fisheries and Oceans. The ships aren't armed, and it's only able to book some of its Coast Guard expenditures. Wouldn't it be simple just to put a $50,000 gun turret on a $20 million ship and book it? And why has that not been done? And as a corollary to that, also with these icebreakers, will we be able to claim the money that we spend on those as part of our 2%? And if it requires arming those ships to get that, would you be willing to commit to do that?
Thanks for the question, Evan, because you actually sort of underline one of the challenges that Canada has always had with the idea of 2% as the metric by which we judge whether or not a country is living up and contributing to NATO. Canada, over the past decades, has been there to lead in NATO on all of the various initiatives that have put forward. We continually step up and punch above our weight, something that isn't always reflected in the crass mathematical calculation that certain people turn to very quickly, which is why we've always questioned the 2% as the be-all and end-all of evaluating contributions to NATO. So yes, there may be ways where we could shift some accounting or make a little tweak here, or give every Coast Guard member a handgun and say, okay, we've done our job. Would that make Canada safer? Would that make Canadians better off? Would that make us better able to counter the malign influence of Russia in democracies around the world, the partnerships with China, the activities of the DPRK in Iran? Our approach on defense is a profoundly serious one that looks at what capabilities we need, what is needed and what is good for Canadians, where we can best contribute to the world, and how to get there in a responsible way as a government. That has guided us, not some nominal targets that make for easy headlines and accounting practices, but don't actually make us automatically safer. That's the work we've done. That's the work I've asked Bill to do, and that's exactly what he's done. Bill.
Yeah, if I may, Canada's made the greatest investment in the Royal Canadian Air Force since the Second World War. In the last 2 years, we've signed contracts for over 200 aircraft for the Royal Canadian Air Force and made a historic investment in the training of new pilots and maintenance crews. We're also making the most significant investment in the renewal of the Royal Canadian Navy in its history. 15 new surface combatant ships, 6 new Arctic offshore patrol vessels, new supply vessels, and as we announced just earlier this week, we're doing the work now necessary to identify exactly what our Royal Canadian Navy is going to need for underwater surveillance in a submarine fleet. We know that there's a great deal of work to do, but respectfully, I think Canada's obligations to our NATO partners and to our own citizens in the defense of our country requires more than a little bit of accounting variation. It really requires investment, real investment in capability for our Canadian Armed Forces. We have asked them to do an extraordinary job, and for over 150 years, they have been there for Canadians, but also for all of our allies around the world. we're going to make sure that they have that capability and they also have the people that they're going to require to live up to our obligations and to defend our country and our continent. That requires investment. But we want to also reassure Canadians, we're not just spending money, we're investing money. And that's investing in capability for the Canadian Armed Forces, but it's also investing in Canada. It's investing in Canadian workers, Canadian industry, and the Canadian economy. And I think that work, if we show our work to Canadians and to our allies, I can tell you that in all my conversations with our allies over the course of this week, I think they have come to a very good understanding and a real appreciation for the hard work that Canada is doing to live up to our obligations. And as well, I think we've got more work to do to explain to Canadians why these investments remain a priority for our government and why there's real benefits to Canadians by making these investments and delivering not only on our commitment to our allies, but on our commitment to defend our country.
Last question.
Bien sûr. La question souligne un petit peu à quel point
The question highlights to a certain extent
quasiment arbitraire,
how the almost arbitrary figure, or a figure that's linked to very few things, and what that 2% represents. Theoretically, there are things that we could do so that we could account for more in our armed forces. But those are not necessarily things that would help us to be safer, better protected, better able to counter the influence of Russia and Russian attacks. What we have undertaken is that instead of asking how can we get to that 2%, we are asking what do we need to do to create armed forces that have the capacity and the skills that will be necessary in the years and decades to come. It's by taking that responsible approach that we can stand here today and say that the investments that we will be making will achieve that 2% by 2032. But moreover, they will make Canada a safer place. They will make the Canadian Armed Forces an even more capable organization that can counter the increasing threats we're seeing across the world. And we will be there for our partners and allies as they will be there for us.
Alex Ballingall, the Toronto Star. You say that the 2% is a crass calculation, but we've heard your allies over and over again all week talk about how important it is for all members to hit 2% as a reflection of a fair burden share within the alliance. It's obviously been a political problem for you guys this week. Are you comfortable having that problem remain hanging over Canada for another 8 years when we have some of the allies saying this floor should be raised to 2.5%? 3%. Can we remain below the 2% for another 8 years?
It actually hasn't been a political problem this year and this week. It has been a conversation that allies have been pleased to hear that we have a plan and a timeline to get to the 2%, but mostly they are interested and excited about the kinds of investments we're making. From 88 new fighter jets to up to 12 new submarines, to moving forward on NORAD modernization, to continuing to step up in support of Ukraine. Canada is here. We have the seventh or eighth largest defense budget in NATO. We're one of the big countries in NATO that contributes significantly to everything people are doing. And when they hear us say, yes, we're going to be doing even more. We're going to be stepping up. We're getting the equipment that people are going to be relying on. We're getting the strength in our military that the world can count on. That is good news. It has been good news this week and will continue to be good news as we make sure that Canada continues to step up in the world and punch way above its weight.
Thank you. This concludes today's press conference.
Sure.
Can I just add something? I think that for a long time, Canada has been blessed by our geography, which is a difference with many other NATO countries. What is different now is that we can not only rely on that geography anymore, particularly in the Arctic. And what our allies are seeing now is that we are investing also in ourselves, in our defense, in our Arctic, Because at the end of the day, Canada's in charge with Arctic countries, the defense of the northern frontier of NATO. And that's what our allies have seen this week as well.
Thank you.